In the summer of 1887, a woman stood on an auction block in the dusty town square of Millfield, Texas. Her name was Margaret O'Sullivan, and she was about to be sold. Sold. Like a sack of grain or a head of cattle. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd, listing her qualities. Strong. Can cook, clean, handle livestock. Men were bidding on her future, 6 months of it, to settle her dead husband's debts. Her hands weren't bound, but they might as well have been. Her eyes were hollow, but a fire still burned deep inside them. What happened next would transform her from a broken widow into the most powerful ranch owner in 3 counties. This is the story of how a silent man's 2 words started a war, and how the most unlikely partnership in Texas built an empire that would last for generations. The morning sun cast long shadows across the square when Ezra Blackwood rode into town. At 34, he was already a legend. They called him the Silent Baron, a man who owned more cattle than most folks had seen in their lives, yet spoke fewer words in a month than most men spoke in a day. His face was weathered leather, carved by the Texas sun, and his steel-gray eyes held secrets no one dared to ask about. He'd ridden into Millfield for grain, not to witness what the locals grimly called a debt auction. It was a cruel practice, born from the drought of '85 that had left so many families with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the debts on their books. He tied his horse outside the general store, but the commotion in the town square pulled him in like a moth to a flame. A crowd had gathered around a makeshift wooden platform, and on that platform stood Maggie. Ezra figured she was in her late 20s, though hardship had etched a decade more onto her face. Her auburn hair was pulled back tight, and her blue cotton dress was patched and faded but clean. Dignity was all she had left, and she wore it like armor. Her story was the town's latest tragedy. Her husband Patrick, a good man with bad timing, had tried to expand his ranch too fast. A cattle drive accident took his life, leaving Maggie with a mountain of debt. The bank, owned by a ruthless vulture named Cornelius Whitmore, had swooped in, demanding payment in full. When Maggie couldn't pay the $300, Whitmore invoked an old, ugly law, the one that allowed creditors to auction off debtors for indentured servitude. Now here she was. The price of her life for the next 6 months was being shouted across a dusty square. Ezra moved closer, blending into the crowd. He saw the desperation in her eyes, but he also saw something else. Strength. She held her chin high, her gaze fixed on the distant hills, refusing to look at the men bidding on her. The bidding started at $50. It climbed steadily. $65, called out Jonas Hartwell, a farmer known for working his hired hands into the grave. His grin was a predator's snarl. 70, countered another man. With every bid, Maggie's face grew paler, but her posture never broke. She wasn't just standing there. She was enduring. Ezra had seen countless auctions, but this was different. This wasn't livestock. This was a person, and something deep in his chest tightened. The price hit $90. Only 2 bidders were left. Jonas Hartwell and a cattle buyer named Rex Donovan, a man with a reputation as black as his heart. 6 months with either of them would be a death sentence of the soul. "Do I hear 95? The auctioneer bellowed. "She's strong. Been running her late husband's ranch for near on 6 months now." Rex Donovan raised his hand. 95. Hartwell scowled, did the math in his head, and shook his head. He was out. 95 going once. The auctioneer's hammer was already raised. That was when Ezra Blackwood did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He stepped forward. He hadn't come to town for this. He hadn't intended to get involved. But something about the woman's unbroken spirit, something about the hungry look in Rex Donovan's eyes, made him act. $200. The words were quiet, almost a whisper, but in the sudden hush that fell over the crowd, they might as well have been a thunderclap. Every head turned, even Maggie's. For the first time, her eyes met his across the square. He didn't see gratitude. He saw assessment. She was sizing him up, trying to figure out if he was her salvation or just a different kind of damnation. The auctioneer, Silas Crow, found his voice first. "Did I hear 200? 200 from the gentleman in the black hat?" Ezra gave a single sharp nod. Rex Donovan spun around, his face a storm cloud of anger. No one bid against Rex Donovan, not like this. 210, he spat out, his voice strained. Ezra didn't hesitate. He didn't even blink. 300. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. $300. That was more cash than most families in Millfield saw in a year. It was an insane price for 6 months of labor. It was the price of a prize bull, not a person. Rex Donovan's face turned a shade of purple Ezra had only ever seen in a sunset. He wanted to keep bidding. His pride demanded it, but his wallet screamed no. With a curse muttered under his breath, Donovan stepped back, defeated. 300 going once, going twice. The auctioneer's voice cracked with excitement. This was a record. Sold to the gentleman in black for $300. The crowd began to break apart, buzzing with the story they'd just witnessed. Ezra walked toward the platform. Maggie watched him, her sharp blue eyes tracking his every move. Up close, he could see the calluses on her hands, the lines of worry etched around her eyes. She was a woman who knew hard work and hard times. She held herself ready, like a cornered animal, prepared to fight or flee. Sir, if you'll just sign here, the auctioneer said, holding out a ledger. Ezra ignored him, his eyes still locked on Maggie. What's your name? He asked. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. Margaret O'Sullivan, she replied, her own voice impossibly steady. Most call me Maggie. He nodded. I'm Ezra Blackwood. My ranch is 15 miles north. She waited. He offered no explanation, so she took the initiative. Why did you do that? Bid on me? It was a fair question. One Ezra wasn't sure he knew the answer to himself. He'd acted on an instinct he couldn't name, a mix of outrage and recognition. He saw something in her, something valuable. Seemed like the right thing to do, he said finally. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Sir, the paperwork. Ezra finally turned, signed the documents, and counted out $300 in gold coins. The weight of the gold seemed to shock the auctioneer more than the amount. As the papers were signed, Maggie watched every detail, memorizing faces, names, amounts. Information was power, and she was powerless. For now. 6 months of service, the auctioneer explained to Ezra. She's legally bound to follow your orders. You're responsible for her room and board. Ezra pocketed the bill of sale and turned back to Maggie. You have belongings to collect? A few things at the hotel. I've been working for a room. Get them. I'll wait. As Maggie walked away, Ezra felt the weight of every eye in town on him. The silent baron had just become the talk of 3 counties. Speculation would run wild. Had he bought a mistress, a servant, or had he just lost his mind? He didn't care about gossip, but as he watched her disappear into the hotel, a single thought echoed in his head. Had he just made the smartest decision of his life, or the biggest mistake? 20 minutes later, Maggie returned with a single worn carpet bag. It held everything she owned in the world. She walked straight to him, her composure a shield. Most women would be weeping. She was planning. Is that everything? He asked. Everything that matters, she replied. He untied his horse and started walking. She fell into step beside him. They walked in silence through Millfield's dusty streets, 100 curious eyes following their every move. At the edge of town, a second horse, a sturdy bay mare, was waiting. Can you ride? He asked. I can ride. She swung into the saddle with a fluid grace that spoke of a life spent on horseback. The ride north began in that same heavy silence. The land itself told a story of hardship. Abandoned homesteads, sun-bleached cattle bones, creek beds cracked and dry. An hour into the journey, as they crested a low hill, Maggie finally spoke. The Rocking Bee Ranch. That's yours, isn't it? Ezra glanced at her, surprised. Everyone in the county knows the Rocking Bee, she said. They say you run more cattle than the big outfits down south. They also say you started with nothing. People say a lot of things. Is it true? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Started with 100 head in a section of land, 12 years ago. And now, 4,000 head, 8 sections. The numbers were staggering, a testament to a fortune built with sweat and silence. He stated them like facts, no pride, no boasting. It was just what was. As they rode on, Maggie studied him. Nothing about this man was impulsive. His clothes were practical, his gear well maintained. His intervention at the auction wasn't an emotional whim. It was a calculation. But a calculation for what? Then as they cleared a gap between two hills, the rocking bee spread out before them. It wasn't a ranch, it was a kingdom. The main house was a two-story fortress of stone and timber. A bunkhouse, a massive barn, a blacksmith shop, and sprawling corrals were laid out with an engineer's precision. Everything was planned, efficient, built to last. This wasn't just a place to live. It was a statement. It was a legacy in the making. "It's beautiful," Maggie said, the word escaping her before she could stop it. Ezra reined in his horse, looking down at his creation. "It's functional. Those aren't mutually exclusive." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was the first crack in his stoic armor. As they approached, an older man with the bow-legged walk of a lifelong cowboy emerged from the barn. "Boss, didn't expect you back so soon. Get the grain?" "Didn't make it to the store," Ezra said, dismounting. Something else came up. The man's eyes shifted to Maggie, his expression a mix of curiosity and confusion. "Charlie Moss, meet Maggie O'Sullivan," Ezra said. "Maggie, this is Charlie, my foreman." Charlie tipped his hat. "Ma'am, any relation to Pat O'Sullivan?" "I was his wife." Charlie's face softened with sympathy. "Sorry for your loss, ma'am. Pat was a good man." Ezra turned his attention to settling Maggie in. "Charlie, have Rosa prepare the guest room in the main house." "Yes, sir. Company for supper?" "Yes." As Charlie hurried off, Ezra took Maggie's bag. "I should explain the situation," he said as they walked toward the house. Maggie's heart pounded. Here it comes. The truth. "I'm listening." "You're here for 6 months. That's what the paper says. But I want to make one thing clear." He stopped, turning to face her. "I didn't buy you to be a servant." She stared at him, bewildered. "Then why did you buy me at all?" He met her gaze, his steel-gray eyes unwavering. "Because what happened back there was wrong. And because I think you might be exactly what this ranch needs." Her mind raced. What did that mean? "I don't understand." "The rocking bee is successful," he said, his voice low. "But it's missing something. I've built the buildings, bought the cattle, hired the men. But I've never had a partner. Someone who understands this life from the ground up. Someone with the strength to help build something that lasts." Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar feeling, fluttered in her chest. "You're offering me a partnership?" "I'm offering you a chance, a 6-month trial. Show me you have what it takes. Show me you can help make this ranch even more successful. If you can do that, when the 6 months are up, I'll make you a full partner." The offer was so far beyond anything she could have imagined, it left her speechless. In a single day, she had gone from being sold into slavery to being offered a stake in an empire. But she was a practical woman. Life had taught her that offers that seemed too good to be true usually were. "And if I'm not what you're looking for, what happens after 6 months if you're not satisfied?" "Then you'll be free to go, and I'll give you $1,000 to start over somewhere else. Free and clear." $1,000. A fortune. Enough to buy her own ranch. It was an absurd, impossible offer. This man was either crazy or he saw something in her that she couldn't see in herself. They had reached the porch of the main house. She looked up at its solid construction, a house built to withstand anything. "Why?" she asked, the single word holding all of her confusion and fear and hope. Ezra picked up her bag. "Because I've spent 12 years building something worth having. Now I'd like to spend the next 12 years building something worth leaving behind." As they stepped inside, Maggie realized her life had just been split in two. There was the life she had known before this moment, and the life that was just beginning, and she had no idea where this new life would lead. The house was like the man, solid, functional, and lacking any sort of warmth. It was clean, well maintained by a housekeeper named Rosa, but it was a bachelor's house. No flowers, no small comforts. Just wood, leather, and stone. The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a real bed and a window overlooking the heart of the ranch. After Rosa left her, Maggie sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process the day. This morning, she was a pariah facing servitude. Tonight, she was a prospective partner in the biggest ranch in the county. It felt like a dream, a dangerous one. But as she looked out the window at the well-ordered world Ezra had built, a thought took root. Maybe, just maybe, this was real. Maybe Ezra Blackwood was exactly what he seemed. A man who built things to last, looking for someone to help him build something even better. The question was she that someone? Dawn on the rocking bee was a symphony of work. The lowing of cattle, the clatter from the cookhouse, the steady rhythm of men starting their day. Maggie woke early, dressed in her one remaining work dress, and went downstairs. She found Rosa in the kitchen. The smell of real coffee, not the chicory substitute she'd been drinking for months, filled the air. "How many men work here?" she asked. 12 regular hands plus Charlie and Senor Blackwood," Rosa replied. "A significant payroll. This ranch was a serious business. Has Senor Blackwood been down yet?" "He is in his study. 2 hours with the ledgers every morning, before he even sees a horse." That detail painted a clear picture. Ezra wasn't just a cattleman, he was a businessman. Maggie found the study. The door was ajar. Ezra was at a large desk, his head bent over an open ledger, the morning light illuminating the intense concentration on his face. She knocked softly. "Mr. Blackwood?" He looked up. Without his hat, she saw his dark brown hair and the full intelligence in his eyes. "Good morning, Maggie. Come in." The study was the nerve center of the empire. Maps covered the walls, detailing property lines, water sources, cattle trails. Filing cabinets were filled with years of meticulously kept records. This was the work of a brilliant, organized mind. "Most ranchers I've known kept their records in their heads," she said, impressed. "Most ranchers fail within 5 years," he replied, closing the ledger. "This is a business, not just a way of life." She moved closer to the desk, her eyes scanning the neat columns of figures. "May I ask what your profit margin runs?" The question surprised him. It wasn't a question he expected from anyone, let alone a woman in her position. "Last year, about 18% after all expenses, an incredible return." "What's your primary market?" "Mixed. 60% to the packing houses in Fort Worth, 30% breeding stock to other ranchers, 10% local." Smart, diversified, he was protected from market swings. "You really have thought of everything." "I've tried," he said, standing and walking to a map on the wall. It showed the Rocking Bee's current holdings. "But there's still something missing." He pointed to 3 adjacent properties. "Expansion. This land here would give us control of the entire Willow Creek watershed. 2 of them are for sale, but the third," he paused, his jaw tightening. "The third is owned by Cornelius Whitmore." Maggie stiffened. The name was a brand on her soul. Whitmore, the man who had taken her home, her life, and put her on that auction block. "I take it you and Whitmore aren't friends." "Whitmore isn't anyone's friend," Ezra said, his voice flat and hard. "He's trying to sell me the old Henderson place, wants twice what it's worth." "Why is it so important?" Ezra pulled out another map, this one showing topographical details. "Water rights. Whoever controls the upper reaches of Willow Creek controls the water for this entire valley. If I owned that property, I could ensure my cattle have water, even in the driest years." It was a masterstroke of strategy. In Texas, water wasn't just life, it was power. "Have you considered making him an offer he couldn't refuse?" she asked. Ezra looked at her, intrigued. "I'm listening." She moved to the map, her finger tracing the creek bed. "Whitmore is greedy, but he's also a banker. He understands pressure. How much cattle traffic goes through the Henderson property during the big drives? Most of the ranchers in this valley use that route. It's the most direct way to the railroad." "So," Maggie said, a slow smile spreading across her face for the first time. It transformed her. "If someone were to restrict access through that property, it would cause a lot of problems for those ranchers. Add days to their drives, cost them money." Ezra stared at her, the gears turning in his mind. He began to smile himself. You're suggesting I orchestrate a situation where Whitmore's own banking customers pressure him to sell me the land at a fair price. I'm suggesting, she said, her voice laced with steel, that the best way to deal with a vulture is to take away his meal. It was a brilliant, ruthless strategy. It was also a declaration of war. Before Ezra could respond, Charlie Moss burst through the door, his face grim. Boss, sorry to interrupt. We've got a situation. South past your fence. Someone cut the wire during the night, drove off about 50 head. Ezra's expression turned to stone. Fence cutting was a serious offense. It was how range wars started. And boss, Charlie added, his voice low, Billy found tracks. They're leading east, straight toward the Whitmore property. Ezra's jaw was a granite ridge. This wasn't a random act. It was a message from Whitmore. Round up 6 men, he ordered Charlie. Meet me at the south gate in 10 minutes. We're getting those cattle back. Sure. As Ezra grabbed his gun belt, Maggie spoke, her voice clear and firm. Take me with you. He paused, his hand on the butt of his Colt. This isn't a social call, Maggie. There could be trouble. I can handle trouble, she said, her eyes flashing. And I can handle cattle. You just paid $300 for my service. Well, this is the kind of service I'm best at. He studied her for a long moment, weighing the risk. He saw no fear in her eyes, only resolve. Finally, he gave a short nod. Can you shoot? I can shoot. Get a rifle from the case in the hall. 20 minutes later, Maggie was riding alongside Ezra and his men, a Winchester rifle resting comfortably in her hands. The men had accepted her presence without question, though she could feel their curious glances. A woman on a cattle recovery mission was not something you saw every day. The damage was just as Charlie described. The wire was cleanly cut. The tracks were fresh. This was professional. They're not worried about being followed, and Ezra observed, studying the trail. As they crested a hill, they saw it in the distance. Smoke rising from the abandoned Henderson place. Ezra pulled out a pair of field glasses. After a moment, he handed them to Maggie. What do you see? She focused the lenses. 4 men, and cattle in the corral. Our cattle. But it was worse than that. The men weren't just holding the cattle. They were working them, changing the brands, trying to erase the evidence of their theft. That's definitely our stock, Charlie whispered from beside them. I'd know that brindle cow anywhere. Ezra took back the glasses. We need a plan. They're armed and they'll fight. Before he could lay out an assault, Maggie spoke up, her voice low and steady. If I can get to the east side of the corral, I can open the gate, stampede the cattle. In the confusion, you and your men can move in. It was a good plan, a dangerous plan. It put her in the most exposed position. Too risky, Ezra said immediately. Less risky than a frontal assault, she countered. If we charge in, they'll hole up in the barn. We could be here for days. Charlie reluctantly nodded. She's got a point, boss. Ezra was torn. His instinct was to protect her, but his mind told him her plan was the best chance they had. All right, he finally conceded. Wait for my signal. 1 rifle shot, and if it goes wrong, you get out. Forget the cattle. Maggie worked her way around, using the terrain for cover. She got within 50 yards of the corral, her heart pounding a steady rhythm against her ribs. She could see the rustlers clearly now, and then she saw him, the 5th man, sitting on a horse directing the operation like a general on a battlefield. Cornelius Whitmore. This wasn't just rustling. This was a direct act of war, led by the banker himself. She waited, her hand on the corral gate's latch. The signal shot rang out. Maggie sprinted. She threw her weight against the gate just as one of the rustlers spotted her. Hey, someone's at the corral! A shot rang out, not Ezra's signal, but a bullet from a rustler's rifle. It whizzed past her head, close enough to feel its heat. She dove behind a water trough as the panicked cattle surged out of the open gate, a river of thundering hooves and dust. The chaos was her cover. Ezra and his men charged in, their guns blazing. The rustlers, caught by surprise, blinded by the dust, were overwhelmed in minutes. 3 surrendered. The 4th and Whitmore himself were already galloping away, disappearing over the horizon. Let him go, Ezra called out to his men. We've got what we came for. The captured rustlers confessed quickly. Whitmore had hired them, told them the silent Baron was all talk, that he'd never fight back. Maggie emerged from behind the trough, her rifle still at the ready, a grim smile on her face. They'd all underestimated Ezra Blackwood, and they'd all underestimated her. The ride back to the Rocking Bee was a triumph. As the recovered cattle moved ahead of them, Ezra pulled his horse alongside Maggie's. "That was well done," he said, his voice holding a new note of respect. "You kept your head under fire." "It was a good plan," she said. "Your men executed it perfectly." As they crested the final hill, the Rocking Bee spread out below them, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. It looked like a sanctuary, a fortress, home. "You know," she said, looking at the ranch, "we never finished our conversation about the Henderson property. What about it?" "After today," she said, a glint of steel in her eyes, "I think Mr. Whitmore is going to be very motivated to sell." That evening, on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky, Ezra said something that would prove to be a prophecy. "You know, Maggie, I'm beginning to think that $300 might be the best investment I ever made." The confrontation had sent shockwaves through the county. The story of the silent Baron's charge and the mysterious woman who rode and shot alongside him became the stuff of legend overnight. Cornelius Whitmore had intended to send a message of intimidation. Instead, he had created two heroes. 3 days later, a visitor arrived at the Rocking Bee. It was Samuel Hartford, the patriarch of the largest ranch in the next county over. Hartford was in his 60s, a man forged from Texas granite, respected and feared in equal measure. That he had come himself meant this was serious. They met in Ezra's study. "Miss O'Sullivan," Hartford said, his sharp eyes taking her measure, "I've been hearing interesting things about you." "I hope not too interesting, Mr. Hartford." "Interesting enough," he chuckled. He turned to Ezra. "Blackwood, I came to discuss a proposition, one that might interest both of you." He spread a map on the desk. Red marks dotted ranches across 3 counties. "Whitmore has been busy," Hartford said. "Every one of these marks is a ranch that's had problems. Fences cut, cattle stolen. Every single one either owes money to Whitmore's bank or sits on land he wants. It was a systematic campaign of terror. And after what happened at your place," Hartford continued, "I think he's going to change tactics. He's going to try to start a range war, pit us against each other, then buy the ashes for pennies on the dollar." The air in the room grew cold. A range war would drown the valley in blood. "How do we stop it?" Ezra asked. "We don't just stop it," Hartford said, his eyes gleaming. "We turn the tables." He produced a second map, this one showing planned railroad expansions. "The Texas and Pacific is coming through here in the next 2 years. Land values are going to triple." Maggie leaned forward, her mind racing. "Whitmore knows. He's been buying up land along the proposed route for months, using intermediaries." Ezra traced the route with his finger. It went right through the Henderson property. "If he controls the land where they build the stations and loading pens," Ezra said, "he'll have a monopoly on shipping for this entire region." Hartford smiled. "Which is why I'm proposing we form a ranchers cooperative. Pool our resources, present a unified front." He then pulled out a third document, a massive government beef contract. The Army needed 10,000 head of cattle over 2 years. "No single ranch can fill this order," Hartford said, "but together, we can. The profits would be enough to break every one of us free from Whitmore's bank for good." It was a brilliant, audacious plan, but it was also a direct challenge to Whitmore's ambitions. "What's the catch?" Maggie asked. "The catch," Hartford said, "is that we need to control the shipping points along that new rail line, the very same points Whitmore is trying to monopolize." The strategy was clear: form the cooperative, win the government contract, and use the resources and legal justification to acquire the key properties before Whitmore could. It was a high-stakes poker game for the future of Central Texas. "It's dangerous," Ezra said. "If Whitmore finds out, he'll do everything he can to sabotage us." "Which is why we need someone to run it," Hartford said, looking directly at Maggie. "Someone who understands both the business and the cattle. Someone we can trust." The unspoken offer hung in the air. This was bigger than a partnership in one ranch. This was a chance to become one of the most powerful figures in the entire Texas cattle industry. Before Maggie could even respond, a messenger arrived from town. Whitmore had filed a formal complaint with the sheriff, accusing Ezra and his men of cattle theft and assault. It was an absurd lie, but it was a legal maneuver designed to tie them up, to discredit them, to stop them before they could even begin. "We need to get to town," Maggie said, her voice hard as iron, "before Whitmore can manufacture any more lies." The ride to Millfield was tense. When they arrived, Sheriff Morrison, a fair but cautious man, laid out the situation. "Whitmore has affidavits. 3 men swearing you attacked them without provocation. Did they mention they were altering brands on stolen cattle?" Ezra asked dryly. "Whitmore says he has bills of sale for that cattle." The sheriff sighed. It was a web of lies, but a well-constructed one. "Sheriff," Maggie said, stepping forward, "what if I told you we have an eyewitness? Someone who saw Cornelius Whitmore personally directing the entire operation." Morrison's eyes widened. "I'd need to hear from this witness." "The witness is me," Maggie said, her voice ringing with conviction, "and I'm willing to testify to it in court." Morrison leaned back, stunned. A woman's testimony against a man like Whitmore was a dangerous gambit. "If word of this gets out," Maggie added, "I'll likely have an unfortunate accident before I ever see a courtroom." A plan was forged. Maggie would give a formal sworn statement. Morrison would issue a warrant for Whitmore's arrest, holding him for questioning while he investigated. And Ezra would ensure Maggie stayed alive to see it through. They had just declared all-out war. As they left the sheriff's office, Ezra looked at her, a mixture of admiration and apprehension on his face. "You realize this changes everything." "Everything was already changing," she said, swinging up onto her horse. "We're just making sure it changes in the right direction." The attempt came 3 days later. Maggie was riding a fence line in the east pasture when the shot rang out. The bullet screamed past her ear, a deadly hornet. Her reaction was pure instinct. Instead of running, she spurred her horse directly at the cluster of rocks where the shot had come from. A second shot went wide. The ambusher, unnerved by her charge, was already scrambling away. She found the tracks of a single man, an amateur. Whitmore was getting sloppy and desperate. The assassination attempt, however, had the opposite effect Whitmore intended. Instead of terrifying the local ranchers, it galvanized them. An attack on a woman, and on Maggie O'Sullivan, the woman who had stood up to him, was a line crossed. 2 days later, the 6 most powerful ranchers in the region, including Samuel Hartford, gathered in the main barn of the Rocking Bee. It was a war council. Guards were posted. Rifles were leaned against the walls. Hartford stood before them. "Gentlemen, we're here because Whitmore has made it clear he's willing to burn this county to the ground to get what he wants." Marcus Thompson, a gruff, old-school rancher, gestured toward Maggie. "Are we really discussing business in front of a woman?" Ezra's voice was dangerously quiet. "You're talking about the woman who stared down Whitmore's rustlers and survived an assassin's bullet. She's earned her place at this table more than any of us." Hartford nodded. "In fact, I'm proposing she coordinate this cooperative. She understands the numbers and the strategy better than anyone." A stunned silence filled the barn. A woman in charge? It was unheard of. James Porter, another rancher, spoke up. "Can she handle it?" Maggie didn't wait for someone to defend her. She stood up and walked to the map. "Mr. Porter, your ranch excels at breeding. Your annual revenue from that operation is approximately $12,000. Mr. Hendricks, you control the water. You lease access for $4,000 a year. That income could be doubled under a cooperative agreement. Mr. Thompson, you have the best transportation routes. Mr. Crane, you're closest to the proposed railhead." She looked at each of them in turn, having just laid out a stunningly accurate and insightful analysis of their individual operations. Individually, you are all successful, but coordinated, we become an unstoppable economic force. The question isn't whether I can handle it. The question is whether you're ready to stop fighting over scraps and start building an empire. The men were speechless. She had just demonstrated a level of business acumen that commanded their respect. The cooperative was formed. Maggie was appointed operational coordinator, but their first move wasn't to round up cattle, it was to secure their future. Maggie pointed to a small town on the map. Cedar Creek, she said. It's a small shipping point, but it sits right in the middle of the new railroad route. The operator, Joshua Freeman, is old and looking to sell. If we acquire it, we control the shipping for the entire region. It was a brilliant move, but Whitmore was thinking the same thing. The partnership, however, almost imploded before it began. Old rivalries flared up. Marcus Thompson accused Dutch Hendricks of hoarding water. William Crane accused James Porter of providing inferior breeding bulls for a joint drive. The alliance was fracturing under the weight of old grudges and stubborn pride. Maggie called an emergency meeting, but instead of mediating, she laid out the cold, hard numbers. "Gentlemen," she began, standing before a table covered in ledgers, "let me show you what it will cost us if this fails." She read the figures. The cost savings of cooperative cattle drives versus individual ones, $18,000 a year. The savings on shipping commissions through a cooperatively owned facility, $25,000 a year. The profits from the government beef contract they could only secure together, over $60,000 a year. She closed the ledgers. The question isn't about whose bull is better or who gets more water. The question is, do you want to make money or do you want to make excuses? The blunt truth hit them like a physical blow. Their petty squabbles seemed foolish in the face of the fortune they were jeopardizing. The alliance solidified, stronger than before. But they were too late. A messenger arrived with grim news. Joshua Freeman, the owner of the Cedar Creek shipping facility, had been found dead. A heart attack, the official report said. But Freeman was healthy, and his heir, a nephew from back east who knew nothing of the cattle business, had immediately put the facility up for sale. A sealed bid auction. They would have one shot, and Whitmore, with his bankroll, would surely outbid them. It seemed all was lost. Just as despair began to set in, a man arrived at the Rocking Bee. His name was Miguel Santos. He had been Joshua Freeman's foreman for over a decade. He was quiet, loyal, and he carried a secret that would change everything. "Senora O'Sullivan," Santos said, his eyes filled with a quiet grief and a burning anger. They sat in Ezra's study, the maps of their fragile empire spread across the desk. "I have come to make you an offer." He explained that Freeman, wary of men like Whitmore, had kept two sets of books. The official ones showed a modest local business. The real ones, which Santos now produced from a worn leather notebook, showed something else entirely. The Cedar Creek facility wasn't just a local shipping point. It was a crucial link in an international network, moving cattle from Mexico to markets as far as Chicago. Its true annual revenue wasn't $15,000. It was over $50,000. Freeman kept a low profile to avoid this very thing, Santos said. This revelation changed the entire game. Whitmore wasn't just trying to buy a small shipping yard. He was trying to seize control of a gold mine. "Why bring this to us, Mr. Santos?" Ezra asked. "Whitmore would pay you a fortune for this information." Santos's expression hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Because Whitmore killed Senor Freeman." He recounted what he had witnessed. A heated argument between Whitmore and Freeman over the sale of the facility. He saw Whitmore leave a bottle of expensive whiskey as a supposed peace offering. And after Whitmore left, Santos had found something on the floor. He produced a small medicine bottle. The label was for digitalis, a heart medication, lethal in high doses, a poison that perfectly mimicked a heart attack. It was murder, plain and simple. But it was a perfect crime. A drop bottle wasn't proof. There was no way to connect it to the whiskey, no way to prove it in a court of law. Whitmore had been careful, but he hadn't been careful enough. "So what do we do?" Maggie asked, her voice low. Santos then produced his final, stunning secret, a legal document signed by Freeman weeks before his death. It was a right of first refusal, an agreement that gave Miguel Santos the legal option to purchase the facility at a fair market appraised value if Freeman ever decided to sell. Freeman had been protecting his legacy and his loyal foreman. "I cannot afford to purchase it myself," Santos said, "but with the cooperative as my partner." The plan was breathtaking. Santos would exercise his option. The cooperative would provide the financing. The independent appraisal, based on the official books, came in at a paltry $25,000, a fraction of its true worth and an amount they could easily afford. The heir, delighted, signed the papers. In a single stroke, they had acquired the single most strategic asset in the region, right from under Whitmore's nose, using his own victim's foresight against him. Whitmore was apoplectic. He launched a smear campaign, accusing them of cheating, of using legal tricks. But the story of the loyal Mexican foreman outsmarting the rich, powerful banker became a local legend. Instead of turning people against them, it drew more ranchers to their cause. The cooperative swelled from 6 members to 12, then to 20. They were no longer just a defensive alliance. They were a movement. Whitmore, seeing his empire of fear crumbling, made his most desperate move yet. At dawn on a Saturday, a massed force of nearly 20 riders launched a coordinated, simultaneous attack on 3 cooperative ranches. They stampeded cattle, poisoned a water tank, and burned a barn filled with winter feed. It was an act of pure terror designed to show that membership in the cooperative was a death sentence. But Whitmore made one fatal miscalculation. He didn't know about the mirrors. The communication system Ezra had set up had been expanded. As the first attack began, signal mirrors flashed across the valley. By the time the raiders reached their final target, the Rocking Bee, they weren't met by a skeleton crew. They were met by 30 armed defenders from a half-dozen ranches, dug in and waiting for them. The battle was short and brutal. The raiders, expecting an easy victory, rode into a slaughter. 3 were killed, more were wounded, and the rest fled in a panic. In a saddlebag left behind, they found what they were looking for: gold coins and a letter of credit drawn on Whitmore's bank. It was the closest thing they had to a smoking gun. The failed attack was the final nail in Whitmore's coffin of intimidation. The cooperative was now seen as the only source of safety and security in the county. It grew to 23 ranches, controlling more than half the cattle in the region. They had won, or so they thought. Whitmore had one last card to play: the railroad. He had spent a year cultivating relationships with the Texas and Pacific executives. If he could convince them to route their extension through his properties, bypassing Cedar Creek, he could still choke the life out of the cooperative. He could make their shipping hub worthless. "We need to get to the railroad executives in Dallas," Maggie said. "We need to show them that we are the future of the cattle business in this region, not him." The trip was dangerous, but they had to go. "I'll go," Ezra said. "You stay here. It's safer." Maggie looked at him, the same fire in her eyes he'd seen on the auction block. "Like hell I will. This cooperative is as much mine as it is anyone's. I understand the business case better than all of you. I'm going to Dallas, with or without you." He saw that look, the unbreakable will that had started this all, and he nodded. "All right, we go together." The journey to Dallas was a final battle in a long war. They arrived to find Whitmore already there, whining and dining the railroad executives, poisoning their minds with lies about the cooperative. Maggie and Ezra walked into the Texas and Pacific headquarters the next morning for their meeting with the regional director, Harrison Caldwell. They didn't come with whiskey and cigars. They came with ledgers. "Mr. Caldwell," Maggie began, laying a portfolio on his desk, "we represent 23 ranches, 60,000 head of cattle, and existing shipping contracts worth over $200,000 annually." Caldwell's eyebrows shot up. Whitmore's promises paled in comparison. She laid out the numbers, the logistics, the projections for growth that would triple the railroad's business within 5 years. She painted a picture not of a simple cattle consortium, but of a modern, efficient, and massively profitable economic engine. Caldwell was impressed but cautious. "Mr. Whitmore has made some serious accusations about your business practices. He claims you use violence and intimidation." Maggie was ready. She produced a second folder. It contained Sheriff Morrison's official reports on Whitmore's rustling, witness statements from the coordinated attacks, sworn affidavits from local business owners detailing a pattern of extortion and harassment going back years. "Mr. Caldwell," Maggie said, her voice steady, "our organization is a partnership built on voluntary cooperation. Mr. Whitmore's is an empire built on fear. The choice you have to make is which of those you believe represents the future of Texas. That evening, a message arrived. Whitmore wanted a meeting. They found him in a private dining room, a smug look on his face. He made them an offer, $50,000 cash to buy out their shipping rights and disband the cooperative. When they refused, his smile turned venomous. "You don't want to refuse," he hissed. "I have friends, powerful friends." He then produced a telegram. "This arrived an hour ago," he said with a triumphant sneer. "It's from Harrison Caldwell. The Texas and Pacific has decided to route their extension through my properties. It's over. You've lost." The air left the room. It was a knockout blow. All their work, all their fighting, for nothing. But as Maggie looked at the pristine piece of paper in Whitmore's hand, something felt wrong. It was too clean, too perfect. "May I see that?" she asked. Whitmore hesitated for a split second, but handed it over. That was his mistake. She looked at the timestamp. "This is an impressive forgery," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "But the City Telegraph office closes at 6 p.m. This is stamped at 7:30. Whitmore's face turned white, then red, then purple. He had been caught in a pathetic, desperate lie. "You're still finished," he snarled, his composure shattered. "Even if you get the railroad, you won't live to enjoy it." Just then, the door opened. Harrison Caldwell himself stood there, flanked by two other executives. "Mr. Whitmore," Caldwell said, his voice dripping with ice, "I wanted to deliver our decision personally." He looked past the sputtering banker to Maggie and Ezra. "After reviewing the evidence, the Texas and Pacific has decided to route our extension directly to a new terminus at Cedar Creek, to be built in full partnership with the Ranchers Cooperative." Whitmore looked like he had been shot. "Furthermore," Caldwell continued, his gaze now fixed on Whitmore, "based on the extensive documentation of your business practices, the railroad will be severing all ties with your bank, effective immediately." It was over. In a single moment, Whitmore's empire, built on lies and fear, had crumbled into dust. 3 months later, Maggie stood on the porch of the Rocking Bee. Her 6 months of indenture were a distant memory. The partnership with Ezra had become something deeper, something unspoken but unbreakable. The cooperative they had forged in fire was thriving, transforming the entire region. Ezra came out and handed her a cup of coffee, their familiar evening ritual. "Any regrets?" he asked. She looked out at the vast expanse of land, at the empire she had helped build. She thought of the woman on the auction block, desperate and alone. She had faced down assassins, outsmarted bankers, and united enemies. She had found a strength she never knew she possessed. "Only one," she said, a smile touching her lips, "that it took a debt auction to find out what I was truly capable of." The silent baron had found his voice, and Maggie O'Sullivan, the widow sold for $300, had become the Empress of the Texas Plains. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, you're not going to want to miss the two incredible tales we've got queued up for you on the screen right now. Click on one of them to keep the journey going. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story from our channel.